right, once again, welcome. So Yesenia Yser, I am from Red Hat Supply Chain Program Team. I started about 2 years ago and built out both the program and as well as the engineering team, both from hiring and mentoring to the technical requirements that we to the engineering and product teams. On today's agenda, we're going to talk about what a software supply chain is, why is it such a hot topic nowadays, go over a technical overview of what a supply chain security is, some threats and attack vectors, security recommendations, so you can leave today with some actions, and talk about the balancing act of security within an organization. So what is supply chain and why is it such a hot topic? So back in 2020, we had a major breach called SolarWinds that essentially compromised a lot of companies through Oracle, and the foundation of it was the fact that there was malicious installation of packages through these. Someone uploaded malicious packages into the system, and that spread across a lot of the SolarWinds customers. To help with this, we have the US executive order that was out in February 2001. And then from there, a lot of organizations, including NIST, the OpenSSF, and other groups have come together, kind of build out recommendations and guidelines to help forward. As you can see from 2020, there was a spike increase of cyber attacks to 650 to 2021. And recently, the FBI released that about 300% increase in cyber attacks since. Yes.
What was the content of
So essentially, the executive order was, we're going to go into some of the recommendations from that, but really focused on securing the software product, really ensuring that we're securing the build process of how these products are being released across from just not the US, but across the globe. Because a company such as Red Hat, we reach across the globe. So any compromise within any company that reaches just in a global scale could affect, of course, the globe. We have software now going into automotive. So government is using a lot of proprietary software from these high-tech companies. So making sure that anything that the government uses in their own industry and in their own offices are also making sure that they're protecting themselves, because they are holding our data. They are using our data. They are protecting us at a government agency level. So they have these regulations and standards such as the SBOM, so the software bill of materials, in which whenever we get a product, something that you're able to download, you can actually see the components that build it. So what libraries and components are you using and what are the versions of it? And part of that reason is to make sure that when you do download the software and you see these versions, you're able to map them to DVEs and some of your security advisories to make sure that you're aware of the risk that you're bringing into your software products. Very good question. So a little technical overview. Here we have a very basic assembly line. If you were just very basic, think of a flow. It always starts at your SCM, where you're essentially uploading your upstream data, you're making your changes, you're pushing it to your repository, whether it goes to upstream or it goes to downstream. From there, you have some CI/CD automation that essentially works through a build system, goes through your QE and testing system. You have your security validations to make sure that you're meeting your business needs. And then you have your content release that's delivered out to your customer. So this is kind of like a very basic, you see the butterflies, it's all happy, it's one flowing. But as engineers and folks in the industry, we all know that something's going to fail. So at one point of our assembly line, we might have to go back to another area or phase within the build process. So now QE can go back to source code management, send that back to developers. Hey, this is not what we expected. Some of security validations could go back to QE. It's like, hey, QE, make sure you're testing for this, this, and this. And then maybe we go to release the content and we forgot our SBOM, we forgot our manifest files, we forgot to hash it and provide these cryptographic information for our customers. So now it goes back to some other location. And of course, we all have to track our work. So there's always this ticketing system. So we see this back to back, this many to many flow. So that seems simple. What could go wrong? So let's meet our engineers. I love Legos. So you will see a very big Lego theme in my presentation. So we have our box truck engineer, who is a QE engineer. They work in their own industry, in their own section. We have Spider-Man and Goblin, who are now our release engineers. We have our wizard, who is our CI/CD builds. And then we have the little gentleman on the Nintendo, and he's our infrastructure. All of them work in a silo. All of them are building individual pieces of our software supply chain. And guess what? None of them are talking to one another. So we may seem a very simple flow from A to B, our input and output, but because there's no conversations between all of them, we're just kind of hacking away. And it's like, hey, here you go, Spider-Man, go push this together. And, the stormtroopers like, don't forget your audits. And then they're like, okay, let me just put this together just to satisfy that and moving forward. So realistically, some engineers prefer cloud providers for business reasons. We might have some legacy systems, some infrastructure that is on-prem. We might have some VMs. And of course, I don't know what company does, but I've never seen one company that only has one cloud provider or one cloud provider that only communicates within its own self. So you have multidimensional communications with on-prem, VMs, and across multiple cloud providers. So as you can see, at the bottom, we have our build pipeline. And because we have multiple engineers kind of working on it, not only do we have one source code management system, but we have multiple. We'll have multiple CI/CD tools because, hey, Tecton changes came out. That's cool. We have Jenkins, we have Travis CI, we have all these new technologies that everyone wants to use because I get it. They're shiny, they're fun, they're new. So as we are building out our supply chain, now we have a multitude of multiple services that run the same functionality because of the silos within it. And as you can see, it's kind of visual. You can kind of tell what's going on. And then you have your upstream and your third-party libraries that are injected at different points of this build system and handed off to our lovely customers. So this is what I really see as a supply chain, a nice bowl of spaghetti. Not only is it hard to consume in a visual aspect, but you can't eat it without making a mess. So this is what happens with our build pipelines. When we are siloed and we aren't communicating with one another, we just have a big bowl of spaghetti. But the fun part is, what I had shown you on the previous guy does not show the magnitude of what could happen. We're not talking about different infrastructure. We're not talking about different network configurations, the different operating systems. We're not talking about the usability and the permissions across the connectivity points. And we're also not talking about the tech stack. So different vendors, different libraries, the source code languages, and the versions. So your CI/CD might have one version of Jenkins, but your build system might have another. So honestly, that bowl of spaghetti looks like a cleaner mess. So one of our threats are intelligence. So as I mentioned, we have a multitude of objects within the build pipeline. You have vendors, you have CI/CD tools, you have operating systems, and this is just a very small scale of what could be seen within the build pipeline. I like graphics, they're pretty. So what can you do now? So first off, what is your perspective on this? Are you a consumer? Do you produce? Or are you both? At this point in time, if you own a car that has a technology in it, if you have a smart refrigerator, if you have, I do, technology is, you're both consumers, and if you're a producer. So despite what my parents might think, some of us think that the little magical button creates software and everything happy and dandy. But as we all know, this is not how software is made. Unfortunately, maybe one day we'll get there with the robots, but we're not there yet. And then by then we won't have jobs. So let's not push through that. So going back to our magical, semi-understandable supply chain, as we're going through it, as I mentioned, we go ahead and we do a lovely check of where are we pulling in third-party libraries and components into our build system. Where are they being injected? And the truth is, they're being injected everywhere. So every single one of those green dots has the potential of injecting upstream, third parties, libraries, functions, whatever it is, you name it, it's there. So what do? We go ahead and we download. We're like, why not? I got to build this. I got a deadline. I got to go. I got to get paid. And then we go ahead and we import from some wildcard from some random library. It works, right? I passed my QA. It's accepted criteria. I got my story points. I'm good. So here's some recommendations. It's kind of depending on where you are in an industry. You have some companies that have been around for forever, and you have some companies that have been starting. The ones that have been around forever, I'm going to tell you it's quite a challenge. It's going to be a bit, but just patience. But here's some recommendations from the supply chain team that we have identified and put into play, and we're sharing out with the community. During the development cycle, go ahead and make sure you're using version source code repositories. So any source code that you're actually uploading, you're making sure that you have proper versioning documented so you know which versions are there. With the US executive order, there is a requirement for companies that the government uses to have a list of what versions they're using. What do they use this for? They map this with any known security vulnerabilities or CVEs that may come out. Implement code reviews. You know, some of us are fans of code reviews, but we all need that critical feedback for our growth and for software. So of course, implement some security reviews. Use what we like to call trusted libraries and dependencies. Please don't go on Pastebin or Reddit or any of the fun websites to download source code and then upload it into it. Use more of a trusted libraries. Secure base images. So your operating systems and your base images that you use in your Docker containers, that you use across your build, make sure they're coming from a reliable source. Recommendation is to have a central artifactory where you inject it, scan it, and make sure you're aware of where your vulnerabilities are on that level. So even if you do, you at least have it audited and tracked, scanned, and you're at least of the risk. Of course, scanning your source code at the different levels of the phases, but essentially in the development phase, and then your base images, we recommend clear or similar use. Let's take a sip of water. So during the build phase, you would want essentially an isolated build service. We don't build in production. We don't build in dev and push it into production. We always have the individual environment where we're building and making sure that what we're building is isolated and won't be injected into production in whatever sense. Build as you code. So as you're building, as you're coding, you're making sure that you're protecting as much. And from a QE perspective, most will understand the gates, but the gates could be a hit or miss with engineering teams. So being able to gate your builds as much as possible. From your perspective, I'm sure there's a lot of champions for gates to make sure that the quality and the assurance of the software that's released. So security has the same desire, is to make sure that everything that's released is gated with the sensible purposes. And then enforce separation of duties. So if you shouldn't have access, you shouldn't have access, and making sure that Bob from sales or Sally from marketing doesn't have access to our build pipelines and being able to deploy what they want because the customer asked. So that would be recommendations from the builds. At delivery is always to ensure provenance. So provenance is provenance of an artifact. Provenance is to be able to identify where and who created this artifact. So as a consumer, as a customer, being able to know that, hey, Red Hat did produce this and this is why. Providing cryptographic hash of the artifact at the end so we can map it. I'm sure you downloaded some software, you get the hash value and they're like, oh, you can validate and check. That's to make sure that you're getting the piece of software that vendor wants you to create. If hash values don't match, that means it's compromised and did not come from it. You also want to ensure you have an identity of who created it. And then from there, you usually get build artifacts, build instructions, and sources and dependencies. That's where kind of the SBOM comes in. And then that's our little provenance checker. And always, no matter which phase in the build process you are, in force separation GUI, keep an inventory of the different components, the applications, the systems, your network, as well as the different network layers as you're going from the cloud providers and whatnot. Keeping your systems up to date, having kind of that compliance check of your CI/CD tools, making sure that they're up to date with the latest versions, and any security advisories that come out are being patched. Monitor them for anomalies, making sure you're working with your security team, that they have visibility and access into the system so that they can keep track of any malicious or dangerous effects. And of course, limiting access to these systems using identity management systems, certificates, your SSH key, your GPG keys, whatever it is that you like to use or is recommended across your industry. All right, cool. You got it? Is there anything else? So there are several frameworks and general security guidances out in the wild web. We have NIST that releases security guidances. They're continuously updating and modifying them. One at the bottom is SP 800-218, which is just general best security practices. They do have a supply chain section under the secure software development framework, SSDF. Then there's my personal favorite, our SALSA, which is supply chain levels of software artifacts. And here we have our hot streak. So this goes into different levels of 1, 2, and 3, 4, which kind of tells you which level of protection the industry or standards, the industry or the product has as far as their supply chain goes. This is still a work in progress. So if you see any companies saying that they're in SALSA 4, I believe the SALSA 4 requirements aren't finalized. So this is a continuous, I think they started this late 2021. And then Cloud Native Foundation. This general 2 years because of the multitude and the cross connectivity between cloud providers, legacy systems, VM, kernels, and the works. So general network practices are a security guidance recommends. What would be a hat talk without a Red Hat plug? So foundation and frameworks to essentially providing trusted software to our consumers. Now, the balancing act of security. As we all know, especially from a QE perspective, you just have to work with different teams. Security works with the businesses, engineering, products, marketing, and sales. Despite the fact that we are probably, my team is personally called COPS. So we're supply chain ops. So they just call us COPS, which is great. But as a security team, we have so much impact across the organization that I like to consider it as a partnership. So security works with development and developers work with upstream. Security also works with our stakeholders, our business, our auditor, infrastructure, and our DevOps. And those lucky folks get to work with our customers, and we have to deal with the regulations, ensuring that we're meeting them and complying with them. And then there's also the external or open source communities that we work with. So the fun part is development culture is something that as a security professional, I don't want to impact. You know, the innovation and the creativity to develop and build these products is what's the beauty of engineering. So in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of shifting left with security or baking security in. And really what we need to do is making sure that we're partnering with these different organizations and getting ahead of the game, being part of the development process, being part of the conversation as we're building so that we can meet these requirements. So as engineers, not only are you engineering to your best, but you're also being security conscious, because that is a competitive edge as an engineer, is to come in with the security consciousness of, I know how to build this and I know how to protect this. We at Red Hat have shifted this left, and we've partnered with our engineering, our product teams, our sales, our marketing, our legal to kind of make security at its core development cycle. You know, we're making sure that security is easy to understand, coming out to the public, and making sure that we're sharing and influencing the best that we can to making sure that security is being done to the best of the ability. And then we put it in terms of risk guidelines, information that's easier to consume rather than, hey, did you check this box? Because as we see in recent years with Log4j, Travis CI, NPM, NVIDIA, so on and so forth, you can't just do check the box security. You really need to work with the folks. So with that, I thank you so much for coming to the talk, and I'm not sure if we have time for questions.
Find the sweet spot in the development life cycle that security can be maximized. The communication, the conversation is fleshed out enough to really have like definable actions or advice for start building requirements that matter. Or should there be requirements for security that are fleshed out to the point of an actual feature set?
Good question. I would say a conception. I really appreciate when the engineers come up and they're like, hey, we haven't really fleshed this out, but this is what we're thinking of doing. And I come in as more of like, okay, just make sure you think of this. Once you have your design document fleshed out, have your security requirements section where I usually write down, I'm a nice security professional. I'll write down a list of like, make sure you're doing this and this and this. And then as you do your design document, you take those and you put those under your security requirements. And then they come back and then, you know, they're like, hey, the security check this off. But really having that conversation early with them will not only teach you how to make your products better secure, but will also beat the gap where it's, hey, I got a week to deploy this. Does security agree? Can you check this off? Because I'm gonna tell you no, and then I'm gonna make you wait. So, because there's a lot in that concept, because you're connecting things, building things, you're adding things to the build process. So you want to make sure that you're early in the conversation. The earlier the better. And then sometimes, of course, they are engineers too. They all have their work. So coming in last minute and expecting an answer within an hour is a little unreasonable. So really working with them as a partner. Good question. Okay.
And what library looked at it like and go about the testing process when suddenly you don't have a history for being able to test something that's so open source and then libraries.
Good question. So how would you test an open source product that you're bringing in through a merger that you've done white testing on? You have a long list of vulnerabilities or detections. What do? So recommendations, this is not a Red Hat part. This would be my personal professional recommendations, disclaimer. Definitely testing it, running some scans on it to make sure that you've identified it, which you have done. Working with your security team for them to do analysis of the report that has come out so that they can do the risk levels and impact across the organization. You want to make sure that just because you come out with a laundry list of vulnerabilities, looking at your ecosystem, looking at your development, some of them may not have as high of an impact as others. So scanning them is amazing, keeping record of the the vulnerabilities that have been detected and the issues that have been detected is a very good start. You have that inventory, you have that list. And then once you do patch it, if you do return it to upstream, making sure you have the traceability, the timeline saying this is when it was patched, this is when we resolved it, and then kind of keeping it in an artifactory in a central repository that they can pull from. You don't want them continuing pulling from upstream. You want to make sure you're vetting what you're upstream, what you're using in upstream. And then anything that you patch, return it to upstream to return the good back to the community. But that's usually where we'll start, is bringing down upstream, scanning it, making sure, patching what we can do, and then making sure that we're using what we've patched.
There's something about you that we're referring to scanning.
There's several different types of scans. So you have your software composition analysis, your SCA. That one identifies libraries and the components. You have your SAS, your software application security testing, and that will identify any kind of like the OWASP top 10, your known signatures within the software. You have your DAS, which is your dynamic software testing. And that one actually has the product running, and it'll perform kind of a penetration testing. You have fuzzing testing, you have different types, and they all fall on different levels. Your static code analysis and your software composition analysis fall under what's called kind of like the white hat testing, which you're able to actually look at the source code and stuff. Your DAS and your fuzzing are more of like that black box testing.
Then that becomes the dependency for the feature function element set. So if you agree with that. It's kind of a long question.
We will implement the zero trust model. What a council. I think it depends on the ecosystem. I think it's a restate it. Okay. So the question is, if a zero trust model if it would account for all production and non-production inputs, if it becomes a formality and if the policy needs to be adjusted, then it becomes a dependency for the feature and the functionality set. So if I'm understanding that question, it's whether the zero trust model and the policies are considered a dependency for that feature and functionality set. It would really depend on the ecosystem and the level of, yes, your policies are dependencies of your features, but I think in the case of this, it's more of your libraries and your components as the dependencies that we're referring to. But yeah, any adjustments of your policies and any adjustments of your different network layers, they should be accounted for because they are what's being communicated. They are the communication between the different components within, and changing your configurations and changing those policies could have a major impact or risk to your supply chain.